Hey, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. I'm here with my co host, Rania Khalek. Hey, Rania.
Hey, Kevin.
And in between us, you'll see, although we don't usually like to do it this way anymore, so let me get it right. And
I liked being in between you. That was pretty hot.
we gladly go in the closet with you, Lee.
An unauthorized disclosure sandwich.
But we have a Lee Camp comedian who's here to talk about, I don't know, what are we talking about? I don't know.
Is there anything in particular? Like, I don't know. We were like really struggling. We were like, what should we talk about on today's show?
Wasn't Snooki making a comeback? Is that what you wanted to talk about?
That's a pretty big thing.
I think there's some big Ben Affleck news. Do you have any updates on his relationship status?
Right.
No, you're here because your network where you were employed 8 years, you've been the host of Redacted Tonight, and RT America has shut down or is shutting down. I don't know if the process is entirely complete, but effectively, you've all been laid off. Anybody who was an employee, that includes Chris Hedges, who had a show, Jesse Ventura had a show.
I just want to point out that, there's like Jesse, Chris, Lee all have shows, but RT America is a huge network. There was like lots of people working in production and administrative capacity and like audio, camera, like just like any other major television network. It was like a building with a huge staff, and all those people are now out of a job. And so I guess, Lee, like obviously this is connected to the recent war in Ukraine. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened? We know RT in general is like under insane amount of pressure right now. It's been shut down, which shockingly, very swiftly shut down across all of Europe. And, I'm in Lebanon, but for whatever reason, Lebanon is not Europe, but I can't access any of the RT Twitter accounts. They're all inaccessible, but it's bizarre because it has a thing saying you can't access this in Europe. And I'm like, I'm not in Europe. But anyway, we know it's been taken off of Google completely, all of RT and Sputnik. The level of censorship is actually really like alarming. But also the sanctions that have been placed on Russia, I imagine that played into this decision as well. But can you tell us a little bit from your perspective about what happened? It must have been like a whirlwind of a week for you to just kind of overnight have your job taken away.
Yeah, it really was almost kind of instantaneous. On Wednesday of this past week, the managers walked in and said, we're not airing anything today, and we'll let you know what's going on tomorrow. And then we walk in on Thursday, and they have a meeting where they say, it's all over. See you later. Pack up your stuff. We were given no explanation or anything, but I will give you my theories, which, if you read the mainstream media about why RT America shut down, they're just acting like, oh, they lost their platform. DirecTV pulled out or dropped them. So did Roku. And that's why they shut down. For the free market, just shut them down. I think that's utter bullshit because first of all, they had plenty of other platforms. They're big online. They have a big online presence and everything. So there are places that stuff the shows would have continued to air. So the idea that just losing DirecTV, destroyed them instantly is I think laughable. And then also, in terms of funding, like the sanctions on Russian banks, I don't even think have kicked in yet. And even if they had, apparently RT America, which is owned by an American company called TNR, had enough money to operate for several months, if not a year. So I don't think it was like an instantaneous, we don't have the money thing. And I think it almost had to be some sort of like Justice Department phone call or U.S. government phone call at some level that said you're done. Because, and again, I have no inside knowledge about that. I could be wrong, but it just seems like the other explanations about like, oh, they were just having a tough time. Because if that were true, they would have pulled aside certain talents that they wanted to keep and said, hey, we got to go on hold for a little while. Maybe we'll be back in a week, maybe a month. But there was none of that. It was just done. And and I think it sets a very dangerous precedent in terms of banning just adversarial viewpoints, opposing viewpoints. And again, people may want to think that RT America just said, oh, this war is great, Putin's right. But in fact, RT America had a lot of different voices on there. I never said this war was right. I said the invasion was wrong, even though I gave the context for why it's happening, the expansion of NATO, the Nazi forces in Ukraine, etc. But that was what was great about RT America, is it had a bunch of different viewpoints. But what united all these very different viewpoints on RT America was they were almost all outside of the Overton window, the allowable thought on corporate airwaves, on U.S. Media platforms. They were outside of that. And that's why I was doing my show there, and I knew I couldn't do it anywhere else in terms of a large network. And so, yeah, it really sets a dangerous example of just when America is struggling on getting a really kind of large-scale propaganda push out, they're worried people might find out the truth, and so they have to shut down opposing viewpoints. And real quick, last thing is, this was cross-platform, coordinated in the span of 1 week. RT America shut down. Of course, my show is canceled. And my personal podcast called Moment of Clarity was yanked from Spotify, and all of Redacted Tonight videos can't be viewed on YouTube, can't be viewed in Europe or UK. And that all happened in the span of really like 3 days.
That's just wild. And I just want to I just want to say that even if it was just that DirecTV and Roku had dropped RT and that was the reason, although I agree with you, that doesn't sound plausible. Even if that was the reason, those who are arguing that that's just like, oh, the free marketplace, said no to RT, that's still a form of censorship. Like, deplatforming is still a form of censorship. And those companies did that under extreme pressure and letter writing campaigns and lobbying. So even for those people, because I saw some people making the argument that if that's really why RT America shut down, it's not censorship. It absolutely is.
You mean like this guy?
Yeah. So actually, I like Matt Binder. I know him and I like him, but yeah, I just disagree with him here. I saw him say that and I was like, dude, that is a form of censorship. That absolutely is a form of censorship.
And it's just false. Like as if the network found out people didn't like them and just shut down everything in the span of 1 hour. Like, oh, I guess people don't like it.
Right,
just for our listeners, Rania, let me read the tweet just so people who don't end up watching can hear. He said, "Do people not realize RT America wasn't banned or censored? Why are they talking like it was?" Continue.
I do think that eventually we'll find out probably more about why this happened, but there is something to be said about the fact that we know RT America was forced to register as a foreign agent a few years back under the crazy atmosphere of Russiagate.
The first ever media outlet to be forced to do that.
Right. Which, and then we also know that the Justice Department has not relented in their ongoing attack on RT America, as well as other outlets in the US. We just don't see it or hear about it in the media. But it will be interesting to find out why this decision was made when it was, because you're also right that a lot of these various outlets, whether it's RT America or RT International or Rupley or Redfish or Mafic, which I used to work for, all of these outlets have budgets for 6 months to a year. So even if it was the issue of sanctions, it wouldn't happen overnight like this. And I just wanted to make that comment, but I'm sure.
And just real quick, for people who don't know what I do and never heard of my stuff, it's a comedy news show, but it brought in, it's anti-imperialist, anti-war, anti-capitalist, and just those talking points, even though it's a comedy show, is kind of what made it dangerous, I guess, in a way. And it sucks to think we live in a world now where you're really, even in the United States, you're not allowed to have those viewpoints, at least not on a large platform, and they just have to be knocked out. And I have never been censored at RT America. I was never told to say anything, never told I can't say anything. Ben Swan, who worked as a reporter and an anchor for a long time, tweeted out that he's worked at NBC, CBS, and Fox News and RT America, and the most freedom by far that he had was at RT. It's just laughable that RT is this, draconian, crazy place where they just tell everyone on screen to repeat lies. It's the reverse, that we had immense freedom there and CNN does not. So,
I'd like to go back to the foreign agents issue because I think it's actually really important for people to understand what the government here in the US has been trying to do to people at outlets like RT America. And I'll put up this as an example. So this is, she has a very popular account. I have no idea how this woman ended up getting like nearly 500,000 people to follow her. But she wrote, to give you an idea of how huge this is, RT America was the single largest recipient of foreign agent designated funding in the United States from 2016 to 2021. And she puts foreign agent in quotes, which I suppose I should give her credit for that. And there's a good reason for why she's doing that, because it's bullshit to label it like that. And I'll get to that. But they received over $100 million from the Russian government during that time period. Okay, so I just want people to know that this, and by the way, she comes from, right now, she's working at a Pentagon funded applied research laboratory for intelligence and security project at the University of Maryland on her postdoctoral. So just so you know where this is all coming from, she's funded by the Pentagon. And so we can take that down. The Committee to Protect Journalists, who I've been highly critical of because they won't label Julian Assange a jailed journalist in their index of people who are being kept imprisoned. They actually called this out because foreign news outlets in the United States have been forced to register as foreign agents. There's a state-funded CGTN from China that's been made to register.
I don't think BBC has it?
Nope. Of course not. No.
Deutsche Welle does not, from Germany. And then CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation from Canada, they don't have to register, but they did get to Al Jazeera. And you know what happens is people who were with these networks they had their press passes revoked and lost access to Capitol Hill. Right. So anyways, anything you want to say to that, Lee Camp, because this is actually a new development in our crackdown on press freedom, along with like the war on whistleblowers and other things that we can speak of from the Obama and Trump era.
The foreign agent registry is hilarious on so many levels. So that happened under Trump, but it was the Foreign Agent Act, or whatever the name of the act is, was created to have lobbyists for other countries, have them be forced to register as lobbyists for other countries. And it was, I believe, created in the 60s. And it was initially meant for like, lobbyists for Israel to register as foreign agents. AIPAC never has, though. It never actually happened. And so AIPAC, the largest probably lobbying firm for another country in America, has never registered as foreign agents. But it was never intended and had never been used against media outlets because they're not lobbyists. Like, media outlets are not lobbyists. They're not sitting in the senator's office trying to tell them that they need to do this for their country or whatever for another country. And so it had never happened until RT. But they wanted to continue this McCarthyist push under Trump, the Russiagate bullshit and everything. By the way, I despise Trump, but Russiagate was hilarious and pathetic lies from our media. But so they forced they forced RT to register as foreign agent. They forced several other networks from other countries, but of course don't force, like you said, the ones that are so-called allies, BBC, CBC, so many others. Those don't have to register as foreign agents. And they were told, RT America was told at the time, that this would not impact their ability to be at press events and interview politicians and things. And I think within a week afterwards, they revoked all the press credentials. So it served multiple purposes, but one of the key ones was to make sure that these outlets could not actually question our politicians or be in any of the rooms where there are big announcements being made, et cetera.
It also seems to be like a lot of these policies, whether from forcing RT to register as a foreign agent, or whether it was slapping these labels on whether like on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, slapping these Russia affiliated or Russia controlled media labels onto not just the accounts of the actual outlets, but the last couple of weeks they started doing it to actual individuals who work for these outlets, which is just completely insane to mark an individual that way with the scarlet letter of, Russia affiliated media. But a lot of this seems to have been designed also to deny RT and other outlets like it the staff they need to even function. Because, I know when there was the FARA registration, people quit because it's scary. It's like, I don't want to be considered working for a foreign agent. Like that's a scary label. You don't know, it sounds scary. You don't know, you might be scared of the repercussions of that. And then of course, watching people get labeled, nobody wants to get labeled. So I imagine there was probably people quitting over these things too, which may have played into shutting down. I don't know, Lee. That's like another theory that I've heard.
Well, yeah, I can tell you that many people did quit at RT America recently. And from this angle, I understand it in that I was at RT America for a very clear reason. I knew that I create a TV show that cannot be allowed on your mainstream airwaves. And this was the only place, at least on a large platform, that I could create such a show, especially an expensive show with, $1 million cameras and stuff like that. That was the only place I could do it. And have so much freedom, the complete freedom to say what I wanted. And so I knew why I was there. And I think, all my correspondents, the people on camera knew why they were there. But for people that are just crew, just a camera guy or just someone, working in the makeup room, they just took a job. And so for them, it's not like they weren't there because they were like, well, I'm a leftist and this is the only place I can do leftist makeup. So, so it's understandable that when all this pressure comes down and they have family members and stuff buying into the garbage being sold by Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, whatever, and saying, oh my God, I can't believe you work for that horrific horror show over there. It makes sense that many would quit. However, if people say that RT shut down because they didn't have staff, I also think that is not true because they still had enough staff to put on shows. And even if they needed to, if the staff had gotten so low, they needed to decrease the number of shows, they still would have kept things going. They would have kept some things going, like let's say the news. Maybe they would have cut back to just being RT News instead of having shows like mine. But none of that happened. It was Instantaneous, which again makes me think it came from somewhere else.
Something bigger was going on,
And it's worth acknowledging that the decisions that have been taken, which are extraordinary, to engage in this censorship, to suspend access to Sputnik and RT and these other outlets in Europe first and foremost, and then now these sanctions that are having some impact, and the conditions, the Cold War atmosphere that it clearly led to the end of RT America here in the United States. It's being reciprocated by the Russian government in their country. I just would like to quickly read some of the outlets that have been affected. There are independent media that you could expect to face a crackdown, just like we're going to face a crackdown here for having having views against our own government. But the BBC has had to pack it up. Radio Liberty, Voice of America, these are propaganda networks of the United States government that are funded. They put out U.S. state-funded media for a Russian audience. Deutsche Welle, we've already mentioned, doesn't have to register as a foreign agent in the U.S., but they have had to leave. And then, of course, BBC has actually ceased transmission into Russia. And then, like I said, there's a bunch of different independent groups that have done media that are under attack. But this is all I'm not saying it's entirely a response, because war results in its own level of internal repression. But a lot of this didn't happen until the West decided to come down on RT's networks.
Yeah, it's a dangerous tit for tat in many different realms, whether it be news networks or online internet freedom or cracking down on protesters or et cetera. But yeah, you see these things spiral out of control, which is why people are warning that, what's going on in Ukraine, both the US, UK, EU expansion that has threatened Russia's national security and Russia's invasion. Like, that puts us closer to nuclear war in a very severe way. And you have all these people. The latest poll said that 74% of Americans support NATO putting in a no-fly zone. And people don't seem to realize no-fly zone basically equals nuclear Armageddon, or at least very close to it, because
it's humanitarian nuclear Armageddon, though.
Yeah, exactly. Because if you put it in a no-fly zone, then you got to be willing to shoot down Russian jets. And if you shoot down Russian jets, we're on basically nuclear watch. It's totally insane, but that's the level of ignorance that has been put forward by our media. You know, the people responding to this poll aren't getting it out of a vacuum. They're watching our garbage media that's telling them that this makes sense, that's interviewing CIA and FBI and military generals and acting like they're unbiased contributors. And, you know, this is the alternate talking points are what's being purged. Anyone who says that it's insane to talk to military generals when you're trying to stop a war, considering all they do is war. Those are the voices that are getting crushed right now. And it really is amazing to see America in such an Orwellian way use care for Ukrainian civilians, which I think most Americans who are falling for that think that they just care for human life, and they just because they've just fallen for it. Like, you know, I talk to my family members, some of my family, and it's like they just watch CNN and they go, "But what about the kids?" And it's like they're using that to actually continue war, to continue death. The U.S. government right now wants nothing less than for there to be peace in Ukraine. They're loving this. It's great in so many ways for sanctions on Russia, for propaganda wins. And so they're trying everything they can to make sure this continues rather than stops.
It's emotional manipulation. And I've seen it before. It's just on this scale is so interesting because I don't even think that most Americans know what Ukraine, most Americans call it the Ukraine. Like most Americans don't even know what Ukraine is. It's just this place that the media told them in the last 2 months they should really, really, really care about. And it's frightening because you see the media's ability to manufacture consent and then to shut down opposition to it. And it's interesting too, because, you know, Kevin mentioned this the other day when we had him on Breakthrough News, and it really stuck with me. The fact that while Russian media and the Russian perspective and anywhere you can go get the Russian perspective is being completely shut down, which is crazy because you want to get their perspective, whether you agree with them or not. It's important to see what one side of this conflict is saying and what their reasoning is. And I mean, if you care about de-escalation, which I guess Americans don't, but on the flip side of that, everything Ukrainian is true. It's not propaganda. Everything that Ukrainian media puts out, everything Ukrainian officials say is automatically true and must be believed. They're the good guys. The Russians are the bad guys. End of story, nothing in between, which is wild as well because, you know, when it comes to Ukraine, I mean, everyone's saying like we're defending democracy and freedom against an autocratic aggressor. That clearly shows they don't know anything about Ukraine if that's what they think this is about. Because before this conflict took place, what was the world hero, you know, Volodymyr Zelenskyy doing? He was shutting down every single opposition outlet in Ukraine. Every single one was shut down like that. Does that sound to you like democracy and freedom? No, it sounds a lot like what we're doing now in the US, but it's certainly not freedom and democracy. He was increasingly autocratic, increasingly aligning with or appeasing the far-right elements inside of Ukraine and siding with them against Russian speakers and on and on and on. I'm not saying he's the worst person in the world, but it's just so ridiculous to me that now everything this guy, who is literally one of the best actors in Ukraine and is currently carrying out the performance of a lifetime, and he's honestly doing a brilliant job. He's a very good actor, and you can see it on display right now. He really should win like an Oscar for this. But the fact that like we're being told to listen to this person and that everything coming out of the Ukrainian side is true and right. I mean, for God's sakes, I don't know if you guys saw it, but yesterday PBS aired this report. PBS, an organization, a media organization that receives funding from the American government, but is not labeled as such. PBS aired this report about Ukraine where they literally sympathetically interviewed the mayor of a Ukrainian town who behind him had a framed photograph a framed poster of Stepan Bandera, who was a freaking Nazi. Like, he was a Ukrainian nationalist who collaborated with the Nazis, was extremely anti-Semitic, and like his ideas led to the slaughter of Jews and Polish people in Ukraine and beyond. And this guy, this mayor is a part of the Svoboda party in Ukraine, which is like an ultra nationalist, right wing, some consider it a neo-Nazi party. This guy's taking out his gun, calling Russians cockroaches. Meanwhile, he's got the background with this guy behind him blurred out. But it's obvious because Bandera is like a very distinct like hairline and a very distinct like photograph that it's hard not to, even with the background blurred. My point is like, the American media has taken on the role of propagandizing for the Ukrainian side in this war. And so now that's all we're getting. With the shutdown of RT, by deplatforming and removing the entire Russian perspective off air, aside from tiny independent media outlets like this one, like Shadowproof, like Breakthrough, which even if our videos go viral sometimes is still like nothing compared to the amount of space that CNN and Fox News and MSNBC take up. Like, it's literally just one side, I think, more than during any other war. And it's actually quite frightening.
I think this is kind of a long-term battle that has gotten to this point over information. I think that our ruling elite in America kind of didn't have control of the internet in its earlier days. It was kind of the Wild West. And then, it took a while for it to get good and fast and everything. But then you had kind of this like prime prime few years, the early 2000s through, 2014 or 15, where the information could be exchanged quickly. The social media platforms were good and operating well. And the government hadn't figured out yet, the U.S. war machine hadn't figured out yet how to crush those opposing viewpoints. And during that sweet spot, during that time, you saw so many important events pop off because of the ability to share information. Arab Spring, WikiLeaks, Occupy, Bernie Sanders movement, Black Lives Matter, they all start within that window. And then the past several years, the past 5 years, especially since Trump was elected, has just been one after another, domino after domino after domino of how to crush dissenting viewpoints. And it's ramped up until here we are today, where this invasion in Ukraine is being used as the reasoning, the final kind of shock doctrine reason to shut down many of the final remaining opposing viewpoints. Like you said, yes, there's plenty of alternative viewpoints still out there, but they have a fraction of the platform they used to. It's a tiny little space, and the filter bubble, which didn't used to exist 10 years ago, is so extreme. Like, I use the example where when I look on my Twitter, I see just like every other tweet is about freeing Julian Assange, which is wonderful. I think that's awesome. However, it's really just 1,000 people, I think, in a room yelling about Assange, and nobody outside hears much of it.
Because it's curated just for you.
I've had other reporters contact me and go, "Hey, we'd like to talk. We've had a lot of trouble finding anyone who supports Julian Assange."
If you don't mind, I'd like to. Can we go through just like a case example of what Rania was talking about? It was very vivid this past week. The Ukrainians tried to get a no-fly zone imposed off of the attack on this nuclear reactor,
which I'm pretty sure was their fault, by the way. And the reason I say that is because
Well, I actually have it ready, but go ahead if you want to go ahead.
Well, I just want to explain, after the war in Syria, it's after you've seen that war play out, you can spot a campaign, any war, actually, Libya, Syria, anything in the last 10 years that's played out on social media that we've watched has really like primed us to be able to easily spot like a bullshit campaign when it's happening. And the reason I think that a couple days ago, I like woke up in the middle of the night. I'm 7 hours ahead of you guys. And I woke up in the middle of the night. I was like, I couldn't fall back asleep. So I opened Twitter, which is natural, right? And I see this like nuclear power plant trending because all of these Ukrainian politicians, including the foreign minister and the president, are like, we must invoke Article 5 for NATO because this is Russia has launched a nuclear attack that can affect all of Europe by shelling like the biggest nuclear plant in all of Europe that's in Ukraine. And I was like, what the fuck? And everybody's like, oh my God, it's on fire. And I'm like, this is too weird. Like that they're invoking, they're trying to get a NATO no-fly zone based on this.
Also Russia, they're not idiots. Like they know where the nuclear plants are. They're not just firing missiles.
Also, they would kill their own people by doing that. Like it's just stupid. But I like immediately to me, and also it turned out like an administrative building was on fire. And then it became clear to me like it must have been, even if it was the Russian side, it must have either been an accident or the Ukrainians did it just for this purpose, because it's just too weird when then you have the Ukrainian foreign minister like trying to run a Twitter campaign about it immediately. I'm like, okay. Oh, and then Kevin's already on it. Kevin knows what's up.
This is Dmitro Kuleba, who says Russian army is firing from all sides upon Zaporizhzhia NPP, the nuclear power plant, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. Fire has already broken out. If it blows up, it'll be 10 times larger than Chernobyl. Russians must immediately, all caps, seize the fire, allow firefighters, establish a security zone. And he's going off. And then meanwhile, this Canadian nuclear expert comes in. And her name is Claire Whalen. And I don't know if you saw this either.
No, I didn't know that's who she was, but I did see this tweet.
And she goes, appreciate that nuclear experts and active watchers are speaking out and echoing that the nuclear reactors at Zaporizhzhia are not likely to explode in the way that Chernobyl did. It will be bad, but a different bad. This is bad, she continues, because the plant is responsible for a lot of Ukraine's electricity. It's bad because our US didn't need to attack it to knock it offline. Not amused that so Russia, Ukraine, she's using short so she can fit this into a tweet. Not amused Ukraine is misleading so many people with this. All of this is without even explaining what will happen when it goes up. Anyway, so she's admitting that it is dangerous, but there's another thing I don't know if you saw, but I was sharing it. Did you see the instruction that the State Department sent?
I saw
all
you
of its
from
embassies?
you. I saw.
Yeah,
I
so
saw.
I saw this. By the way, just asking questions gets you accused of like trying to
working for Putin. You're working for Putin. You hate Ukrainians. You love war. Right. Why do you love war, Kevin?
Yeah, but here was an amazing posting where it said that so people understand the U.S. Embassy in Kiev called the attack on the nuclear plant a war crime. And the story, by the way, for Ukraine side is that Russia shelled the power plant. The story on the side from Russia is that a Ukrainian sabotage team was actually involved, and that's why. And they attacked the administrative building, because the way that this is built is it's like a building, and then the nuclear reactor is inside. It's like a building within a building. And anyway, so the State Department says to everyone at their embassies, apparently sends an urgent message to all of its embassies after the Kiev embassy said it was a war crime. They go, do not retweet Embassy Kiev's tweet on shelling of the facility being a possible war crime. If you have retweeted it, unretweet it ASAP. And I know the Guardian says this. The Guardian said this may be an endorsement this may show that it's not really a war crime. But I also have another thought. What if they don't know what happened and they don't want to be dragged down the route of being caught in a lie?
Yeah.
I mean, this is classic. This is classic false flag stuff. It's honestly not that difficult to do. I saw Amnesty International tweeted out that Bellingcat had confirmed use of cluster bombs.
Oh God.
And, they show a photo of a cluster bomb on the ground, and it's like, okay, first of all, you've got garbage NED funded Bellingcat putting this forward. But secondly, it's like, how tough would it be for those who want the war to continue, the Nazis, etc., to put an empty shell casing on the ground and take a picture of it? Like, it's the easiest thing in the world. I don't know. It's hilarious.
It's also like, okay, you guys come from the side of the ideological spectrum. All these people who are flipping out about all these things. I'm like, aren't you the ones that are always talking about like bombing Iran's nuclear facilities?
Yeah.
Like, aren't you the ones constantly like that won't sign? Like, isn't it the U.S. that won't sign on to like cluster munitions bans? Like, isn't it the U.S. ally Israel that literally like sprinkled isn't the right word, showered southern Lebanon with like 1 million cluster bombs before leaving in 2006? Like, the other part of all this is there's the outright moral hypocrisy of it, aside from the fact that NATO set the stage for this, US set the stage for this, that literally everything they've done for the last 20 years is what led us to this point, and that they now want to erase all of that, and they're still escalating. Aside from all that, these people are the biggest hypocrites in the world. Like, it's so outrageous because they're all acting like nobody ever invaded a country before. I'm like, don't you guys do that all the time? Like, now it's just so.
Did
like,
you see the clip of Condoleezza Rice?
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. She's just like, I mean, to have a war criminal who was one of the architects of what I think is the biggest crime of this century, the invasion of Iraq, sit there and talk about how this is a violation of international law. I'm like, since when do any of you, excuse me?
This is what Condoleezza does to people.
This is what she does to people. Since when do any of you care about international law? And beyond that, it's just like, you guys are still bombing countries. Like, it's not like this happened 20 years ago and stopped. Like, you're starving so many people around the world. They're openly saying right now that they want to basically like destroy Russia's economy and make everyone suffer. They're openly saying that, like collective punishment, openly. And to me, it's just like, the other thing here is how the russophobia like awakened in everyone, just to see people being so like, let's fire every Russian everywhere in the world. Let's isolate every Russian everywhere in the world. Like,
which is also hilarious because you know how many people inside Ukraine consider themselves Russian and not Ukrainian? But we're like, oh, kill all the Russians. And like half the people in Ukraine are like, we're the Russians. Like,
but like also this idea that Russians everywhere have to like condemn this invasion. Could you imagine if like Americans, if people demanded that like Americans everywhere like condemn American imperialism to like keep their jobs? Like, that never happens. It's just the level of double standards and hypocrisy is incredible. And now, I keep seeing this word whataboutism. They're like, oh, you're engaging in whataboutism. I'm like, are you just not wanting to talk about the fact that we're starving Yemen now? Like, is that your way of not having to like acknowledge that is also still happening right now, and literally nobody gives a shit because we're the ones doing it?
Right. Well, we live in a time now where you have to kind of be like intellectually vapid. I mean, you can't have any context. You can't have any understanding of history. You can't have any understanding of the reality in a larger sense than just what was on a news broadcast yesterday. And if you try and give any of that, then you are, I don't know, shilling for the enemy or whatever. So it really is like, I mean, they're almost yelling at you. No, this has to be context free and no information. Like,
I want to know, where are all those people that, like, I think probably 2 weeks ago, up until 2 weeks ago, were screaming and having like a heart attack online about a few like Joe Rogan's episodes getting taken down, and about cancel culture. Like, Lee, I was so shocked to see that Moment of Clarity was taken off Spotify, despite the fact that it is completely unrelated to your job at RT, or was unrelated to your job at RT. It was like your own independent podcast. And it was removed from Spotify along with anything else that was considered Russia affiliated because of this like crazy McCarthyism. And nobody said anything. Like, nobody's saying anything about the fact like all these shows on Sputnik were removed from Spotify, like By Any Means Necessary was removed from Spotify. And where did this, like, they just disappeared. It's like they evaporated the entire Joe Rogan crowd.
Yeah, I know. The people that are supposedly opposed to cancel culture seem fine with it when it's something they don't agree with or something they don't care for. Then the canceling is fine. But I mean, it's dangerous and disgusting. And the cross-platform thing goes to show, and this isn't the first time we've seen this, but it goes to show that, like, literally, I know people love the term conspiracy theorist to mean you're out of your mind, but this has got to literally these organizations have to conspire, have to meet and discuss to some degree that they're all doing this within a time span, within a short time span, for like this stuff to get taken off of Spotify, off of YouTube, banned on YouTube. RT America goes on, is taken down. There has to be coordinated discussions. It's the only way that can happen like that. And we saw it before several years ago when there were 800 pages, I believe, some of them leftist, some of them libertarian, but something like 800 all deleted off Facebook at the same time, including Free Thought Project, Police the Police, antiwar.com, all taken off of Facebook. And then simultaneously, their editors are suspended from Twitter. And like that takes coordination, that takes conspiring
and lists
to censor these people. And it really is something that Americans should be furious at. But you don't hear much of an uproar.
Lee, can I ask you? So there was this writer over at. I'll go ahead and show the article that went up just for context, because I didn't naturally arrive at this question. This isn't like one of my most pressing thoughts that I have in the moment, but it is something, since I have you and you're a comedian, that I think I would like you to help me understand.
I always match my underwear with my outfit. I do.
You knew exactly where I was going. So this is an article over at The Bulwark, which is Bill Kristol's project,
a quality outlet.
And Tim Miller is an MSNBC analyst, and this is an incredible article. I don't have time to. I'm not going to take up the last 20 minutes or so of the show.
For those who can't see, it's titled "RT Go Fuck Yourself."
Yes, yeah,
which is just good writing. I mean, that's just good writing.
It's really good, and
super original.
This is the outlet that preaches civility in politics, and normally they would not like if we said this about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. Well, no, they would be good with Donald Trump, but we couldn't say this about Hillary Clinton. Anyways, Tim writes this article, and I'm gonna take it down off the screen. He's fixated on the fact that Dennis Miller had a show on RT, which I found incredible, because actually until a day or two ago, I had no idea Dennis Miller had a show on RT.
I thought you were going to say was still alive.
I didn't know.
Yeah, I had no idea he was alive. How did Dennis Miller end up with a comedy show or a show? And also the fact that people would get worked up over Dennis Miller having a show. I mean, this is a you can probably go on. I don't have to tee you up, but such a hack.
It's a perfect tee up, but you don't even know the half of it because you never saw the show. It was literally Dennis Miller interviewing like D-list celebrities. So it'd be an hour of him talking to the guy who played Steve Urkel, or this is literal. Like it'd be an hour of him talking to Dane Cook, and about nothing. It wasn't about politics. It was like, hey man, so what was it like, 10 years ago when people thought you were good? Like that's all it was. And I love that, like, so Dennis Miller actually used to be a fairly talented comedian, but then in around 2001, 9/11 happens. I think he was already leaning right wing, but 9/11 happens and he becomes far right wing, just an idiot. And the first RT, sometimes when they have new people on the network, they would put them on the news broadcast. So they put him on news with Rick Sanchez for an interview. And he goes on after George Galloway, and they're talking about Iran. And George Galloway's off now, so it's just Dennis Miller and Rick. And Dennis Miller's first interview ever on RT was him going, "Who the hell was that guy? Yeah, we should have diplomacy with Iran. Yeah, go sit down with the Ayatollah." Like, it was the most idiotic, just blatantly dumb stuff. And Dennis Miller, but his show would just be him talking to D-list celebrities. So when he quit 4 days ago, claiming he couldn't stand to be at the network anymore. And I was like, yeah, real bold stance, man. You'll no longer interview the guy who played Carlton on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I mean,
whatever happened to that guy? The guy who does a Frank Sinatra dance.
Still around apparently.
Yeah,
and then William Shatner was the other one. I get he's a name, everyone respects him, at least it's used to maybe, but he's 91 years old, and it was him interviewing scientists. It had nothing to do with politics. William Shatner seemed to legitimately, when people would come at him on Twitter over being at RT, legitimately not understand that his show was carried by RT or what RT was. So the attacks against him were like ridiculous. It was like yelling at your 95-year-old grandpa. It was like, what?
He's like, how could you be doing this to Ukraine? What? What's Ukraine?
Exactly.
I will say I did a hit once for watching the Hawks. And when I was in the studio here in Chicago, I sat down, and while I was being prepped and as I'm waiting to go on air, these people in the studio are talking, and this one guy's like, RT. What does that stand for? RT.
Oh my God.
And I'm just listening. I go, you know what? I'm not going to tell you what it is. Like, I'm not going to tell you what that means. And on one hand, you could think that I don't want to be considered like suspect, and I don't want you to question why I'm here doing this interview. But on the other hand, how do you not know who your client is? Like,
right.
Like, I don't really believe that RT America is trying to deliberately hide this, and I don't think
it
that, like,
really wasn't hidden. It's in the initials.
That's too funny. You know, it's crazy too, like what happened with the outlet I used to work for, with Soapbox, which basically like isn't functioning anymore. It just like got kind of shut down as well. I'm still not quite sure what the reason is. But yeah, it's just like people, it's really sad. Like what people don't realize too is like, I saw people cheering this stuff on, and I'm just like, you know, these people, there's people who work there that like have jobs and aren't going to have health insurance now. Like,
yeah,
in America, it's like there's an extra terrifying layer to losing your job, which is you lose your health insurance, because we live in a stupid country that attaches health insurance to employment. And like, just the level of giddiness and like joy people were taking in like the destruction of so many lives really upset me. Like,
yeah. No, I mean, there was a lot of sadness the day they told us a couple days ago, and a lot of people don't know what you know, where they're headed or what they're doing next. And like I said, a lot of them, you know, I was there because I am political. I am anti-war and anti-imperialist, and I wanted to cover those stories that I couldn't cover on other networks. But many of the people there are not political. They just were working at a news studio, and honestly, like, this is the story that will never get told. I guarantee you, not by your mainstream, is that RT America was one of the most diverse workplaces that I've ever seen. I mean, you know, I think I was probably in the minority there, being white. And they hired a lot of people that probably would not have been given a chance at these other networks that weren't, you know, didn't come from the Harvard Yale pipeline. And so it really is sad to see. I will be fine. I'll figure out what I'm doing with my next show. I've created a patreon.com/Lee Camp where people can help whatever the next project is. But a lot of these people, it's a lot harder than that. And it's on that level, it's disgusting as well.
Yeah, I have to say that RT was the first outlet that invited me on air to do a live interview for broadcast.
That's another aspect.
I learned how to do live TV.
Like,
yeah. But just in general, like from like an aesthetic, technical, you know, like people as journalists have to learn how to do broadcast journalism, right? Like if you're not invited on CNN or MSNBC or any program that does live news, then you're completely in the dark about what, you know, look at the camera, keep your eye, you know, like that kind of thing. You don't want to, if you don't want to look like a dope the first time that somebody invites you. But anyways, I had no experience, and RT America with Alona Minkowski's show, who reached out to me, talk about a WikiLeaks documentary that was airing while I was an intern at The Nation magazine, brings me in. I'm like a nobody. Like, I don't know why anybody is asking me for an interview. I'm not doing anything except some independent
your
writing.
Sweet hair.
So I go on air, and I learn how to do a news hit, and then I was able to. One of my favorite moments in the history of this network was when I left Fort Meade. I was driving Daniel Ellsberg, Pentagon Papers whistleblower, from the Chelsea Manning court-martial, and I had a hit. I was told I had to bring him back home to outside of DC and from Fort Meade. But I have to go do a in studio segment, and so I'd say, well, can Daniel Ellsberg come on air with me? Like, I called the studio. I said, I have Daniel Ellsberg. Can he appear with me during this segment? And Alona had me come in. I did this segment with Daniel live in the studio, and that was made possible because like RT America was such a flexible and inclusive outlet.
Yeah, I mean, that's another side of this, is just the number of voices that could be highlighted on RT America. Like I had Redacted Tonight, and then I had an interview show, which you both have been on, called Redacted VIP. And like, that was one of the highlights for me, was showing these incredible journalists, incredible voices like you guys, like Ben Norton or Danny Haifong or Eugene Perrier, or just so many like great, amazing people that would never in a million years be allowed on MSNBC or CNN or any of these garbage networks, because it's too dangerous to have someone that gives the alternate viewpoint, the views that are outside the Overton window. And it really is that's another sad point about this, and upsetting point, is that these voices have lost one more platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really, really infuriating that like there's people out there who don't think this is a big deal because they don't think it affects them, especially even people in independent media. Like, they need to realize that this actually does impact them, because beyond what you just said, which is so important, the fact that the infrastructure, we know now the infrastructure to shut down whatever they want exists across Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the internet itself. Like, they can shut it down, and the infrastructure must have already been there because they did it almost overnight.
That's how they got rid of net neutrality. Why they got rid of net neutrality?
Yeah, like it's so the fact that exists right now, people might be okay because they're like, whatever, they're using it against the Russians and we all hate the Russians. It's okay. But like, you have to realize, if you're an independent media, like, they can shut all of us down anytime they want. Like, It's not my Twitter account. Twitter owns it, and they can shut me down whenever they want. They kind of already have. I'm pretty sure I'm shadow banned. But like,
right, that's another aspect of it, is they don't even need to delete you. They can just stop showing you to people,
which they do to a lot of independent media outlets. That like, it's like the number of people viewing them don't make sense with the proportion of followers they have. Clearly, their stuff is not being fed to their followers. Yeah, I know you had experience with this.
My Facebook used to be my big platform. It was 330,000 followers, and while those followers are still there, they don't show the post to anybody. So I put up a post to apparently 330,000 followers, and it gets 30 shares where it used to get thousands of shares.
Meanwhile, if Stephen Colbert like farts and puts it out, it'll get like, it'll get more views because it's being promoted. Like, I don't even follow these CNN shows, and they're constantly promoted in my feed. Mm-hmm. Their algorithm suppresses, their algorithm censors without you even knowing.
Some of my favorite were, so it used to be with Redacted Tonight before the suppression started. You'd watch a clip of Redacted Tonight, and someone who's new to it would be like, wow, I like that. And then it would autoplay more clips. So people would be like, oh, I'm going to keep watching this.
Yeah.
Starting a few years ago, it would only autoplay like CNN or John Oliver or something. It basically was saying to the viewer, oh, silly viewer, you've stumbled upon something that's not acceptable. Let us shove you gently back over to what's okay.
Yeah, it's literally, like, I don't follow Trevor Noah yet. Somehow he's always recommended to me as the next video. Like, which I don't want to watch. I don't need to see, like, it's like, it's all the same too. Like, it's, anyway.
I have to learn how China sucks.
Yeah, and why China and Africa is very bad, but America.
Or you go live on YouTube and it's just buffering. The video somehow is just people. I'm seeing the viewers that I have who have dropped what they're doing to watch me go, buffering.
And you're probably paying for the same internet access that like Jeff Bezos has on the space shuttle, but for some odd reason, yours doesn't work.
Exactly.
It's not on my end. It's within the YouTube platform. For some reason, they are deciding that the video is going to be slowed down.
Oh, he said Assange again. He said, Assange,
Yeah.
take it down. Buffer.
Actually, I do a podcast with Graham Elwood, Government Secrets, and we were talking about the Nazis in Ukraine, and Graham was live streaming it to TikTok. And the moment he said Nazis, they cut off the feed because he said Nazis, and now he's not allowed to live stream to TikTok anymore. So basically, you are incapable of reporting bad news about Nazis.
We're in this moment where you just see sharp escalations on both sides, and I do think the most radical thing right now, and it's unfortunate that your voice isn't going to be on RT America anymore, but the most important thing right now is to, one, recognize what we've been talking about, which is that we have this existential crisis for independent media, and everyone has to challenge. I think we have to show support or solidarity for everyone who gets called out. That's why I was even willing to say something about Ayman Mohaldin, who had a clip from his podcast pulled out and shared, and then all of a sudden everyone was getting on him because he said that he's going to criticize U.S. policy in Yemen even if Putin is attacking Ukraine. Like, that's not going to change.
I didn't know he got attacked for that.
And the other thing is we have to be imagining how we get to a ceasefire. I think we absolutely have to. We can't let. I know cynicism or realism is acceptable, but I think if we don't imagine a future where Russia's delegation and the Ukrainian delegation can get at a table and come up with a ceasefire, then we are just allowing ourselves to be ruled by this military industrial complex that is salivating over the fact that their stock prices have gone up 15 and 20%, if not more, in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we should all be cheering for peace, but of course, the U.S. government and our media outlets are doing the opposite. They're doing everything they can to make sure this conflict continues. They, while acting like they care about every Ukrainian civilian by keeping this thing going, they are killing Ukrainians. So it's completely backwards. They're gaslighting people into thinking that they care about civilians, and they don't. They want as much death and destruction in Ukraine so that Russia is bogged down in this. It hurts their economy, the sanctions, etc. It's a propaganda win for the U.S. And instead, we should want the opposite. We should want peace. We should want this to be over. We should want all firing to end. And to go back to the news media viewpoints being stifled side of this discussion, I don't know if people out there really want to live, really want their country to be a place where a show called Redacted Tonight gets redacted.
Right.
I mean, gets knocked into oblivion. And of course, it's not just my show, but so many others. And it really is a scary time. Like, people should be standing up for truth, for us to have these platforms, for us to be able to speak out, for these amazing voices to be heard. And instead, you're seeing a lot of the opposite. People are giving in to the kind of frothing fervor of propaganda that comes out of your mainstream airwaves that are funded by Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and General Dynamics. And they are making insane amounts of money on this war. Not to mention, all of those news media outlets lost something like 40% of their viewers the moment Trump left office, and now they've got them back. So war is good for ratings. War is good for a president who can't find his way out of a room and doesn't know where he is, and his approval rating was lower than a ham sandwich, I think. And now he's looking presidential because he's threatening nuclear war with another nuclear power. It's just so much garbage, and we should be standing up for these independent voices. And like I said, if people want to keep up with my work, I just created patreon.com/Lee Camp. I don't know what my next big project like Redacted Tonight will be, but for the meantime, I'm going to keep making my podcasts and my videos. So that'll be going on until I come up with the next.
Are you keeping the Rad Indie Media thing going? I know you have that project. Is that something you're able to keep going?
Yeah. That's, for those who don't know, it's a site that just grabs a bunch of great left independent media out there and puts it all on one page every day. And it's not making money. There's no ads. There's no sponsorship. No one's funding it except me. And it's a good place. You know, ironically, now that I'm the one who's been partially canceled, I intended it both as just kind of a cool online newspaper, but also as a place where if you get knocked off your platform, if you are removed from Spotify, these great independent voices are still in one area where you can go find them. Well, so now that's me. And, you know, people can still get all my stuff at radindiemedia.com, despite the fact that RT America is gone.
It's so weird to take that in. RT America's gone. But Lee, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.